Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's live town hall with AFGE Local 17. My name is Doug Massey, and I'm honored to serve as the president of AFGE Local 17, representing the hardworking bargaining unit employees at VA Central Office. It's a privilege to represent such a dedicated team who have committed their careers to serving our nation's veterans. Before we begin, I want to recognize Alma Lee, president of our National VA Council. Unfortunately, Alma couldn't join us tonight due to a medical issue, but her leadership and dedication over the past 35 years have been immeasurable. Alma is a powerhouse and the most impactful labor leader I have ever met. We wish her a swift recovery and know she's with us in spirit. Let's face it, we didn't come to work at the VA for fame or fortune. We're here because we believe in VA's mission. It demonstrates that through hard work every day. Most people understand this, and they also recognize that leadership's job is to create an environment where employees can thrive. This can't be achieved by instilling fear or attacking our rights, yet the current administration continues to push a false narrative, calling federal employees lazy and a drain on the country's resources. This cannot be further from the truth. We all understand the tireless work we're doing at VA Central Office because we are deeply committed to serving veterans. And to those who throw unfounded insults, we challenge you to walk a day in our shoes, to stand strong, proud, and unafraid of the work that we do. We may not control everything that comes our way, but we can control how we respond. One of the most powerful responses is union involvement. Together, we have a strong, unified voice. We must continue to stand together to push back against harmful policies and ensure the work we do for veterans remains prioritized. This takes unity, determination, and courage, values we know well as public servants dedicated to our mission. Tonight, we are privileged to welcome AFGE's Deputy General Counsel, who handles VA issues, Thomas Dargon, as our featured guest. Thomas will address two key topics tonight: the ongoing threats to telework and the February 6th deadline for the deferred retirement offer. His expertise has been instrumental in protecting the rights of VA employees, and we're fortunate to have him here with us tonight to discuss these important issues. So without further delay, let's dive into tonight's discussion. And Thomas, it's all you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Doug. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the Local 17 Executive Board, and I've seen many friends and familiar faces in the chat here, so it's good to be with you. It's been a busy first couple weeks of this second Trump administration. I think some things might have been expected, others are curveballs, but what we're here tonight to discuss are two main issues: the email that you likely received from OPM called Fork in the Road, and related issue number two, which is about a return to office and what's been seen as a crackdown on telework agreements and remote work agreements in the federal government. I first want to start with just a brief introduction of who I am and where I work. So you're members likely of AFGE Local 17 or another AFGE affiliate across the country. That's part of a larger parent organization, the American Federation of Government Employees in DC. Within that building, there's an Office of General Counsel. That's where I work, and I work specifically on VA issues on behalf of the National VA Council, which you'll see abbreviated as NVAC sometimes in email traffic or on social media. Our team specializes just on VA issues. So unlike my colleagues in the General Counsel's office, who handle a little bit of Social Security work, a little bit of DoD work, and a little bit of TSA, during the week, we're working on VA issues all day, every day. So we like to see ourselves, think of ourselves as subject matter experts on the issues impacting you and your bargaining unit employees. You may have seen, there's a lot of news traffic about this fork in the road. Some of that is to be expected. AFGE's communications department has done an excellent job of amplifying our message and making sure that resources are available to you. I first want to make sure you're aware of one key landing page on AFGE's website, and I'll ask one of my friends from Local 17 to put this in the chat for me. It's www.afge.org/AFGE strong. AFGE.org/AFGE strong. And there's an explainer document there on all of the executive actions that have come out so far, frequently asked questions about the deferred resignation program, links to news articles, talking points, ways you can get engaged with your membership and your members of Congress. So please take a look at that page if you haven't done so already. Moving on, there's been a couple lawsuits filed already by AFGE. If you're a member of the union, you probably receive an email from the headquarters office when those are filed through our press releases. A lawsuit was filed about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, in violations of what's called the Federal Advisory Committee Act. A second lawsuit about Schedule F. A third lawsuit about the access to Treasury Department information and privacy issues. And the one that we're here today to discuss, which was actually just filed earlier this afternoon, and that pertains to the OPM Fork in the Road Deferred Resignation Program. It's AFG's position that that email violates the Administrative Procedure Act, and we've taken legal action to try and enjoin the department from coercing employees into participating in that program without all the necessary information, things like whether the offer is funded, whether it's enforceable, whether you can seek outside employment, if you're subject to RIFs, what might happen to you. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. NVAC has also filed grievances up trying to enforce our collective bargaining agreement, and that's been over the OPM deferred resignation program and what we've already seen as unilateral changes to telework across the agency. So I'll give you just one more bit of background here, which is that telework is not new to the federal sector as of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's existed for decades. The Telework Enhancement Act came about in 2010, requiring all agencies to create and maintain telework programs. The statute that governs collective bargaining in the federal government also requires agencies to negotiate with unions in good faith over telework programs. If you're an employee who has a medical disability and you are able to telework because of a reasonable accommodation, the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehab Act protect you. And we also have a master agreement. There's a whole section of our contract. It's Article 20 of the master agreement. I'll ask one of our friends to drop the link to the master agreement in the chat. But Article 20 governs the procedures that apply to telework, who's eligible for it, and how VA can remove you from the telework program, usually for performance or conduct issues. So Doug, I'll pause there for just a quick second in case there's any questions you might have about that, and then I'll dive into the deferred resignation program and what AFG's guidance is as of now.
I tell you what, I did get a question. This came on my text. I don't know who sent it, but I'm going to put this there right now. We remember Secretary McDonough's 50% in-office attendance requirement, and that violates Article 20 of our collective bargaining agreement, because that article basically says telework is an arrangement between the employee and the employee supervisor, and it says it can be anywhere from 1 day of telework a month to full-time telework to pretty much anywhere in between. That Secretary McDonough came in and put a 50% cap on telework that violates that. We did file a grievance. That is going to arbitration. If you look at the bottom, Friday, February 28th, that's a virtual hearing. We do need witnesses. So what we're looking for are fact witnesses. If you've incurred any out-of-pocket expenses, and those are usually commuting costs, extended child care, I guess adult care, things like that, please contact me. My understanding is the general counsel for VA said they wanted to postpone this because of all the activity. And, you know, if Trump puts an executive order ending telework, that should stay that hearing. The arbitrator said, no, we're gonna go forward February 28th. So it's going to be a very simple case. It's a contract interpretation case. The witnesses are to determine damages. Generally, after that hearing, parties submit briefs about 30 days later. Hopefully, there's a decision 30 days later. Sometimes it can be 2 or 3 months. So we're hoping for something by May. So that's going to be coming up. And that is basically, we get comments that we focus too much on the Board of Veterans Appeals. That's basically everybody that's not at the Board of Veterans Appeals, because they have a different arrangement. So Thomas, did you want to make any
Yeah,
comments? I know.
that's a great case. So Article 20, if you take a look at the master agreement, as Doug just mentioned, telework, it should be an individualized assessment based on the employee's job, right? What they do for the VA, when they're required to be there, what the mission and the needs of the agency are. Departments should not be setting arbitrary caps on the number of days of telework that an employee can work, because that's not that kind of individualized assessment that our contract and the law calls for. So when former Secretary McDonough implemented a 50% cap, as you're calling it, for those VACO employees in the DC capital region, the local's position, and it's one that the union agrees with, is that you cannot set these, artificial, arbitrary caps on telework. That violates our contract. And so that case is going to proceed to arbitration. It's not unusual for a new administration to try to stall cases in the beginning because they want to kind of paint a new picture of what the federal workforce will look like under their leadership. I would encourage Local 17. I know an attorney on my team is handling this case for you all, but I'd encourage any other locals who are on the line to continue pressing forward with your arbitrations. Do not fall for the trap of, delaying them, because it may be 3 months, 6 months, or longer before you're able to get them on the calendar. And if these issues are important to your bargaining unit, you should press ahead. Extensions and postponements are negotiable issues. You can go to an arbitrator and tell them, we want to move forward. So I think Local 17's got a good plan of action there. Moving on to the deferred resignation program. So the news first came out on January 28th, fork in the road, and you might have seen a bunch of news articles calling this a buyout. This is not a buyout. That's where I want to start there and make sure that everyone understands what this is and what this is not. Buyouts are generally under two types of legal authorities: VERA, which is VERA for early retirements, or VSIP, which is for people who are not yet retirement eligible, lump sum payments. And those are capped by law. But those programs, both of which are a type of buyout, are lawful mechanisms that agencies can use to often reduce the size of a workforce before going through what's called a reduction in force, a RIF. So you'll see VERA or VSIP buyouts offered, and it's happened at many times in the past, to reduce the size of organizational subcomponents or agencies as a whole without having to go through a RIF. Because a RIF is expensive. It requires a lot of coordination at the agency head level, at the facility level. You have to take into account prior federal service, military service. You have to define competitive areas very specifically. RIFs are complicated and expensive. So agencies like to use other mechanisms to reduce the workforce without having to do the hard work of initiating a RIF. So what you'll see sometimes are these buyout offers. That is not what we have here. This is not a buyout. So you might see that covered. I listened to, on January 29th, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and NPR, those three podcasts on my way to work. All three of them called it a buyout. I can understand lay people might not understand the nuance, but you are here trying to learn more about your rights and what collective bargaining means in the federal sector. It's not a buyout. What OPM is suggesting you do is tender your resignation voluntarily from federal service by February 6th with the promise, and I'll add the unenforceable promise, that they will continue to employ you through September 30th of 2025. And you may sense some of my skepticism, if not cynicism here. It is subject to a number of legal challenges. As soon as this memo came out, we identified 5 or 6 things on its face which could be deemed unlawful, and you should slow down and make a real serious decision with all the facts in front of you about what to do with this offer. I saw reporting this morning that said about 20,000 federal employees thus far have elected to tender their resignation voluntarily. That number may tick up as we near closer to this deadline, but I want to caution everyone on this call about some of the risks associated with accepting this offer to resign. The first of which is that it is subject to exceptions. So what OPM is doing now on behalf of agencies is collecting a large population of people who say they are willing to resign so that they do not have to comply with any return to office or telework restrictions. Agencies will then have to determine whether the employees in that population can be placed on administrative leave, or if agency mission requirements require them to continue working. You might imagine, I know we're dealing with a lot of employees from VA central office here who may not be in healthcare facing positions per se, but if 50,000 VA nurses say that they're going to resign, VA is obviously not going to be able to eliminate 50,000 VA nurses and put them on administrative leave overnight, right? The nation's largest healthcare system could not absorb that kind of gut punch with that reduced staffing. We have to take care of the patients who are already in the hopper, who have appointments, right? And so agencies like VA are going to be able to make exceptions based on what their critical staffing or labor mapping requirements will require them to do. The other thing I want to make sure you're really aware of is that the federal government is operating on a continuing resolution right now, a CR, through March 14th. And so to an extent, this offer is suggesting that funds, which have not yet been appropriated by Congress, can be used to pay federal employees who are not performing their positions of record in a package that's not even on the floor of Congress right now. And so we're really putting the cart before the horse here from an appropriations perspective. And you might remember the federal government, when it shut down in 2014, 2015, and a bunch of employees didn't get paid on time, they were the very first entity to go into federal court, the Department of Justice, arguing that the Anti-Deficiency Act prevented them from paying employees during a shutdown. And here you see the federal government suggesting that they can obligate taxpayers, right, to pay the salaries of 10, 20, 30,000 workers 6 months into the future without having the appropriations to do so. So that raises serious concerns. And, if it sounds too good to be true to you, I think, that should be telling when you're making this assessment. Another exception is that your position may not be exempted from the program, but you may still be required to work. So you can see every promise or representation that OPM is making, almost every single one of them has a caveat, right? The exceptions have exceptions. It's difficult to follow. They're constantly revising these FAQs. And so you can be required to continue working and not be placed on administrative leave yet. So if it sounds too good to be true, it may be too good to be true. Another important factor you should consider is that the agencies may still go forward with a reduction in force. There can be a RIF action. Again, RIFs are expensive and complicated, but what you've seen with employees who are working in diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, you may have seen some reporting out of the Department of Education over the weekend, those employees being placed on administrative leave. That's likely in anticipation of a RIF action. And so it is still possible that VA could move forward with that RIF action, and there could be a time in the future where those deferred resignations are not honored. And that leads me to how you would enforce this program or this agreement. There was a memo that came out a couple hours ago from the acting general counsel of OPM. That individual, from what I understand, is the former general counsel to former Congressman Matt Gaetz. And this gentleman is insisting that the program is lawful, that these agreements that employees will be required to sign are enforceable, and that the federal government and the agencies, employing individual employees will make good on these promises. I can bet you that those same agency officials are going to be fighting jurisdiction when employees file appeals to enforce these agreements. They're going to be poking holes in these agreements. They're going to be saying your resignation was voluntary, or this wasn't a promise, or there were exceptions to that promise, or Congress never appropriated the funds, so it's not on OPM, it's on Congress. And you may be out of a job and out of a salary, and you may have given up appeal rights and due process rights that you have, whether through an adverse action or a RIF. So I just want you to know that there are still a lot of unknowns about this program, and I would take with a massive grain of salt anything you are hearing from officials at your agency. I've seen some communications through VA Central Office and VISNs, as well as these daily updated FAQs coming from OPM. Take all of that with a big old grain of salt, because I don't know that the representations that they are making to you are truthful and accurate. So Doug, what questions do we have, or how can I better assist you with what's happening with VACO employees?
All right, telework. There's a question here. It says, I was hired as remote. The job posting stated 100% remote. Would I still be subject to return to office? So being remote means your home is your official duty station. And it's different than full-time telework, in which a VA building is your official duty station.
Correct. So just for a bit of background here, as Doug mentioned, telework is when your official duty station is a VA facility and you work at an alternative workstation, an AWS, some number of days per week. Generally, that's your house. Then there's, on the other end of the spectrum, remote employees. Those are employees who are not expected to report to a VA facility to perform their duties at any time, except if you have issues with IT access, or if there's a national emergency of some kind. So if you're hired under a remote work agreement, my reading of these memos that have been coming out from OPM and furtherance of presidential proclamations about returning to office is that they're intending to terminate remote work agreements as well. For employees who live within 50 miles of a VA facility, my understanding is that they are going to seek to force those employees to come into a VA facility. You may have seen it already in the OPM memos with non-bargaining unit and SES employees. They have somewhat interestingly not unilaterally implemented changes for bargaining unit employees, who are the folks on this call, but that is coming.
Yeah, and we had a situation like that at VA Central Office. I think we talked about this with Richard Loeb at the other town hall. There were a group of accountants, and they were saying, okay, we want you to move to Austin. And they were given a letter saying you have 3 months either to move, or we'll try to find you another position at VACO, which could be less money, or you can resign. And that was it. And I forgot the term they used, but they can do that. They can say, I know this is your official duty station, but we want to change it to over here.
Yeah.
Also, too, I have a couple of questions. And I talked to a friend of mine who was planning on retiring anyways, and he's taking the fork in the road offer. And I was, we were talking, I was like, well, there's a lot of skepticism about it, but if you're going to retire now, and if you take this offer, maybe you get an extra 7 months of pay. Maybe you don't, but you're not going to lose anything, right? So is it worth it for anybody to take this offer, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll caveat this by saying, and the lawyers on the call will appreciate it, but I can't give, legal advice to anyone on this call. What I would say, generally is this is a very individual decision, and you should take into account your years of service, your position at the VA, obviously your financial security. If you were to be completely out of a job and out of an income on, let's say, March 15th, when the CR expires and there is no funding. So, whether it's worth it, it's difficult to say for one group of employees, versus others. But I would, just again, caution everybody to sit down and think about this. If you've been, if you're a union official yourself, or you've been in the union for a long time, that promises are cheap. And, new administrations come in all the time promising sweeping reform to the federal workforce, and that often does not take shape.
Okay. Also, I guess Elon Musk put out I don't know if it was a tweet, and it was he said, take the fork in the road offer or mandatory drug tests. And so could you comment about that? I think that's kind of hot off the press.
Okay, good to know. Thanks for that. I have not been on Twitter since the election, and it's been very good for my mental health, but I do learn things a little bit slower because of that. What I'll say is you cannot, that's not lawful. Drug testing is covered by law and our contract. You have to be in a drug testing eligible position, and it has to be for a valid reason. You cannot coerce employees into resigning or give them the ultimatum of drug testing. So that sounds like a threat from someone who does not understand federal employment.
All right. So, go to your parties this weekend, have a good time. Also, if there's been a lot of downsizing and there's not enough office space, and the big one is 425 I Street. There were Board of Veterans Appeals had 5 floors. They have 1.5 now, and there's no space. How, logistically, how quickly could they get new real estate, commercial real estate, and put the desks and everything and get it set up? How long would that take, do you think?
I mean, it depends on where you are. In downtown Washington, D.C., we've got a lot of empty commercial real estate, but GSA has got to enter leases with those properties and get them fitted for government operations. In, more rural localities, it probably takes quite a bit longer. As you know, it's, federal work sites are not always designed to have 100% of the workforce in person all day, every day. Even at our organization, it can be challenging to get an elevator up to your floor when everyone's arriving at the same time to get into the work site. Things slow down, and when there's a bottleneck with commuting, it's not good for anybody. So I don't know, exactly how quickly it would take them to get the space that they need, but I think what you can expect is that agencies, and organizations within VA are going to have to acquire additional real estate if they seriously insist on bringing 100% of the workforce back to in-person work.
Yeah, and I got to say, I've been an advocate for about 12 years, and I remember telework, we used to, bite tooth and nail to get more telework, and they just didn't want to give it. And they kind of looked at it like, oh, it's kind of like a day off or a compressed work schedule day. And then boom, the pandemic hits and people's productivity went way up. And people forget, we used to have snow days like kids at school. Yeah. And we're in Washington, D.C. We don't get a lot of snow, but think of all the regional offices in upstate New York and New England and that whole upper area that gets a lot of snow. And my understanding is VBA was very skeptical and very uncomfortable with the 50% return. They didn't want that across the board because they realized that was a political decision. That was not a performance decision, that productivity will go down. And I know for myself, my colleagues, you get up in the morning early and a lot of people, they turn their computer on and they start working. And I think we all didn't realize until it stopped that commuting is a huge, 2 hours and then getting ready. And, and some people getting ready, it's a whole, it's like, some women, it's like a whole art project going on. And we got rid of that. And now going back to that, I think it's right. I didn't want to telework. They threatened me with discipline in March 2020. I did not want to go work at home. Now, I don't know how I'm going to go back. It's really going to suck. Yeah. And, 1 or 2 days. But I think if they want government accountability and efficiency, I think they really ought to maybe rethink this strategy. And I think it's kind of, going to be very disruptive to the workflow and our productivity.
Absolutely.
Also, I want to mention something, and we can do this because we are not at work. But AFGE, people are wondering, what are you guys doing for us? We're filing grievances. And I did want to ask about a grievance, if there's going to be a grievance on remote status. But every year, AFGE has a legislative conference on Capitol Hill. And this year, it's going to be the 9th to the 12th. It starts Sunday morning. I'll be there at 8 o'clock at the Hyatt. and we have members from Congress. They come and they meet with us, and then we go to Capitol Hill and we meet with them. And this year we're having a rally, and I would like, if you can come, we would love that. Definitely take annual leave, but it's going to be Tuesday, February 11th. We're going to meet at 11:30 outside the Hyatt Regency, 400 New Jersey Avenue Northwest. I got the ticker at the bottom, and that's the Hyatt. It's not that far from Union Station, and it's a 10-minute walk to the Capitol. And if we can get as many people out there as possible, we're having AFG people from all over the country come and to march, and it would to show solidarity would be extremely helpful. And do you have any other information about that, Thomas?
So the legislative conference will be going on all week. There's a meeting for VA union leaders on Sunday morning. We'll be addressing many of the lawsuits filed by AFGE and giving a rundown of what's happening legislatively, politically, legally, and otherwise. And then the member-wide rally, as you just mentioned, Doug, we're meeting at the Hyatt at 11:30. There's many other of our sister unions who will be joining us. We have members of Congress and leadership roles who will be coming to speak at the rally. As many people as we can possibly get. I was just inspired looking at the news. There's a rally going outside the Department of Treasury right now. You're seeing a lot of people fired up, rightfully so, about what's happening with our government and getting involved in numbers that we haven't seen in the past. So please come and be there. By the time we get to the rally on Tuesday, there'll probably be 10 more executive orders. We'll have much more to talk about, more information to share. I know there's a lot going on with probationary employees as well, individuals working in diversity, equity, and inclusion positions. VA's put out a hiring freeze. We've got a lot going on. So there's going to be a lot to learn, and we've got power in numbers. So please, if you can, be there.
One more thing, I almost forgot. The question about, and I think it was addressed, but there's been a lot more, so maybe clear it up. Reasonable accommodation. My understanding is that the Rehabilitation Act, the ADA, that supersedes any kind of office policy. And you had mentioned, did you mention that about a grievance being filed with?
I did. So NVAC filed a grievance yesterday, actually. We received word from human resources officials in Vision 4 that they were directed to put a pause on all pending and new reasonable accommodation requests that involve telework, and essentially not to process those RA requests. That is unlawful, right? It violates the law, our contract, even VA policy as written. And so NVAC filed an institutional national grievance over that issue yesterday. That process takes some time to play out under Article 44 of our master agreement. But as you mentioned, Doug, you cannot terminate a reasonable accommodation for telework simply because someone comes into office and thinks they should bring all the employees back to work, right? That you have a disability and the accommodation is provided by law. It is an effective accommodation that the agency agreed to, and there are limitations and standards that have to be met when terminating or revising that accommodation. It's a bit of inside baseball, but the agency has to show an undue hardship in the accommodation that's being offered to you, and then they have to re-engage in what's known as the interactive process to find another effective, suitable replacement accommodation. So if you are on a reasonable accommodation that involves telework, I would strongly encourage you to retain any documentation that you have related to that RA request, so that if someone takes action to try and terminate or revise that RA, that you have the documentation you need to get with your union president, Doug, or whoever is in charge of your local, and talk about what rights you may have to file any EOC complaint or a grievance or take other corrective action. So hold on to that paperwork. I'd encourage everybody to go into their personnel file and retain whatever information you have related to your appointment as a VA employee, any information you have about prior federal service or things that you may need to defend yourself and make sure that VA gives you the rights that you're afforded.
Yeah, and I was thinking we've had a couple of those arbitrations. This is a terrible story. There's an employee that had she came into the office, they wanted her coming 1 day a week. she needed full-time telework for her disability. And what they did is they offered the last resort accommodation, and she got downgraded from like a 9 to a 7. Steve Eckerman took that to arbitration, kind of embarrassed management. And I think the senior executive was like, well, I want her to come in to take the paper from my printer to my desk. And, everybody's like, why don't you do that yourself?
Right.
And things like that. And she got, she won that arbitration. There was somebody else that had an orthopedic disability. And this was a bizarre case over at Education where a lot of the people, her coworkers, were living in Atlanta and doing the same job. And they had some bizarre excuses. And we prevailed on that. And it was kind of funny because the arbitrator, when he walked in, he had like a cane. He was like disabled. And that's when we kind of knew it was all over for the agency. And they made stuff up. They make stuff up.
Right. And if you've been effectively performing your job on telework with or without an accommodation, right, that's obviously evidence that it's continuing, it's working, right? I mean, you're doing your job and you're doing it well. As you mentioned, Doug, many people, I think myself included, are often more efficient when we're on telework. We're getting more work done. We're more available with less interruptions. And so when the agency takes any action to reduce or eliminate an accommodation that includes telework, claiming that there's an undue hardship, you're going to be the first one there saying, here's my performance appraisal from fiscal year 20, 21, 22, handling more cases than I ever have before. My rating's higher than it's ever been before. What is the undue hardship here? It costs you less money. You don't have to have an office space for me. You don't have to set aside equipment and things like that. So there's plenty of arguments to be made, and we will make them. I want to assure everyone on this call, the General Counsel's office will do everything in its power, and the National VA Council will do everything in its power to enforce the law in our contract and do what's right by our members. So thank you, very much for your support. Take a look at that landing page. Again, it's afge.org/AFGE strong. That gets updated, quite honestly, daily, if not multiple times a day. So that's the best resource for our members to go to get a quick glance of what's happening that day.
All right, thanks. I think we're going to have to wrap this up soon. I want to remind people, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's important. A couple of updates. Sarah Hazan, she's works at AFGE with Thomas. She's one of the attorneys. She's going to be doing the arbitration on February 28th. She's also agreed to do a podcast about reasonable accommodations. That one may not be live. We may record that and send that out to everybody. Also, we have a ton of new people who are quad 7, meaning that you're eligible to join a union, but there is no union because our certification says you got to be at VA. And those people, we do have information we're going to send out. MB Vasilio, I will send out, we did a video of her. I will send that out to everybody so you'll have that with her email information, and that will go out sometime this week. So I want to thank everybody for your patience. I know we've gotten tons of emails, and we're usually very good about getting back that day or within 24 hours. And that may not be the case this week or next, but we'll do our best. And if there's an emergency, my phone number is out there. I don't want to put it out on this, but you're more than welcome to call me. But I wanted to say thank you to Thomas to come tonight, and thank everybody for joining us. Thanks to our members. We really appreciate your support. And we hope this discussion has been both informative and motivating. And as always, our strength lies in staying united and committed to protecting the work we do for veterans. And I really have to go because my wife's like, get the hell out. I need to make dinner. So thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you, Doug.
Good night.